Chapter 16, Section 3, Challenges to the U.S. Policy of Neutrality. As the land war dragged on, both sides sought to break the stalemate. Unable to defeat their enemy on land, both Britain and Germany looked for ways to starve their enemies into submission. To do this, they needed to win control of the seas. Britain stops U.S. ships heading for Germany. The war at sea started with a British blockade of ships headed for Germany. British ships turned back any vessels carrying weapons, food, and other vital supplies to the Central Powers, even ships from neutral nations such as the United States. President Wilson complained to the British about the policy of stopping neutral ships, but he did not threaten to take action. His hesitancy came in part from the strong economic ties between Britain and the United States. Trade with Britain had given a boost to the sagging American economy, and U.S. banks and businesses were earning millions of dollars from loans and exports to the Allies. These same banks and businesses made fewer loans and sold fewer supplies and weapons to the Central Powers. Moreover, many business people in the United States openly supported the Allies. An officer at the Morgan Bank recalled, "Our firm had never for one moment been neutral. We did everything we could to contribute to the cause of the Allies." Uboat attacks increased tensions with Germany. In February 1915, Germany found a way to challenge the British blockade: submarine attacks. Their deadly new weapon was the U-boat, short for Unterseeboot, undersea boat. The German Navy hoped this new weapon would break the British blockade and at the same time stop vital supplies from reaching the Allies. Early in 1915, Germany declared the waters around Britain a war zone. Within this zone, German U-boats could sink enemy ships without warning. Because British ships sometimes disguised themselves by flying the flags of neutral nations, neutral ships going to the zone were also at risk. By international law and custom, warships had the right to stop and search merchant ships that they suspected of breaking a naval blockade. Such vessels could even be sunk, but only if the passengers and crew were removed first. This practice worked for warships, which could take on extra passengers, but not for submarines, which were small and cramped. In theory, a U-boat could allow the ship's crew and passengers to launch lifeboats before sinking the ship. But in practice, this strategy made no sense. A U-boat that surfaced to warn a merchant ship of an attack would become an easy target, foiling its surprise attack. Wilson protested that sinking merchant ships without protecting the lives of passengers and crews violated international law. He warned that the United States would hold Germany to strict accountability for any American casualties on such attacks. The policy of strict accountability was soon put to a test. On May 7, 1915, a U-boat sank the British liner Lusitania without warning. Among the 1,198 dead were 128 Americans. Germany tried to absolve itself from blame by arguing that the ship was armed and was carrying weapons and ammunition. The second charge was true. Nonetheless, former President Theodore Roosevelt denounced Germany's actions as murder on the high seas. Within the State Department, a debate raged about how to respond to the sinking of the Lusitania. Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan believed that Americans had a higher mission than helping one European monarch fight out his quarrels with another. He argued that the United States should accept the reality of submarine warfare and warn its citizens that they traveled on British ships at their own risk. State Department lawyer Robert Lansing opposed this view. He argued not only that Americans had a right to travel on British ships, but also that the United States should vigorously protect that right. Wilson sided with Lansing and sent Germany a series of notes demanding that it stop unrestricted submarine warfare. Afraid that the notes violates neutrality and might involve the United States in war, Bryan resigned. Wilson chose Lansing to replace Bryan as Secretary of State. Lansing was anything but neutral. "The Allies must not threaten," he wrote. "War cannot come too soon to suit me." 4 months later, in August 1915, Germany sank a second British ship, the Arabic, killing 2 Americans. Wilson sent another, more sharply worded protest to Germany. German officials promised that Germany would sink no more passenger ships without warning. In March 1916, they broke that promise by sinking the French liner Sussex, an attack that left several Americans injured. Wilson threatened to break off diplomatic relations with Germany if it did not stop surprise attacks. In an agreement called the Sussex Pledge, Germany promised to spare all lives in any future U-boat attacks on merchant ships. But it attached a condition. The United States must force Britain to end its illegal blockade. Wilson accepted that pledge, but would not accept the condition. Preparedness, promises, and propaganda. Concern over President Wilson's handling of the war fueled a growing preparedness movement. This movement was led by former President Theodore Roosevelt, who pointed out that the United States was ill-prepared for war should it need to fight. In 1915, the Army had only 80,000 men and lacked equipment. At the outbreak of the war, Roosevelt had not sided with either the Allies or the Central Powers. Even so, he was not impressed by Wilson's policy of neutrality. He was even more put off by Wilson's statement after the sinking of the Lusitania that there is such a thing as a man being too proud to fight. Roosevelt had long believed preparedness for war, not talk of neutrality, was the best guarantor of peace. As he toured the country promoting preparedness, many newspapers took up his cause. Advocates of preparedness called for an army of 1 million trained men and a navy larger than Great Britain's. For a time, Wilson resisted calls to strengthen the military, but the submarine menace persuaded him that he had to increase the nation's readiness for war. With an election coming up, he launched his own nationwide tour, talking about preparedness and promising a navy second to none. Back in the capital, he pressed Congress to allocate money to double the size of the Army and began construction of the world's largest navy. Enough Americans saw Wilson's efforts as preparedness for peace, not war, to elect him to a second term. He won re-election by a paper-thin majority on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." While Wilson tried hard to keep the nation out of war, both the Allies and the Central Powers launched propaganda campaigns designed to whip up support for their side. Propaganda is information or rumor spread by a group or government to promote its own cause or ideas or to damage an opposing cause or idea. The information in the propaganda may or may not be accurate. Either way, the intention of propaganda is not to inform, but rather to persuade others to adopt the view or to take that action supported by the propagandist. The Allies waged the most successful campaign. Early in the war, the British circulated stories about alleged atrocities committed by German soldiers in Belgium. The British government appointed a special commission headed by Lord James Bryce, a well-respected historian, to investigate these outrages. Published just days after the attack on Lusitania, the Bryce Commission's report was filled with stories of German soldiers torturing innocent women and children and using civilians as human shields during combat.